You're listening to the New Dominion podcast, where we engage in curious conversations about stewarding our health and community with others. We're so glad you're here. Let's get started. I am one of the hosts, Kirsten Hansen. This is our second episode, and I am here with Abby and Taylor.
Good morning. Yay.
Hello again.
So something I was thinking about is it might be good to say that in our goal in these first 10 episodes is to kind of give our listeners a background of where we're coming from, because going forward, we're going to address so many topics, and the things that we discuss in these first 10 episodes really lay the foundation for that. So people are going to see that this one is called Who Told You You Were Naked?
Makes you wonder who's making these titles.
So
I must say.
Yeah. It's me, in case you're wondering. It's me. Trying to be a little catchy.
In this first episode, we are referencing what lots of people will know as the question that God asks Adam and Eve after he discovers them hiding in the garden. What made you think of this title for what we're going to be talking about today?
Okay. It's always multifaceted in me because I have multiple levels of thinking. And so I will try to keep it succinct. But being in practice for 15 years and hearing from people all the time, it's amazing how many different sources of health information there are, especially in today's world, right? Like we have so much information at our fingertips, and this podcast is just going to be another one of those things at people's fingertips. But between scrolling and your doctors and your family and your friends, there's so many places that we hear, oh, you should do this or you should do this. And as we're talking about conversations surrounding health and our community, I just thought it was really poignant to go back, since we are faith-based, to the beginning where Adam and Eve had chosen the tree of knowledge. Even though they were told to avoid that tree, they went for it anyway. And the first thing that happens is the Lord meets them where they are and just asks, "Who told you you were naked?" And I think of that often with health, of like, who told you that about your health? Who informed you? Why are you believing this about your body? Why are you scared about this symptom? And so I thought it was just a fun and provocative way to maybe get someone interested in what? Naked. What is this podcast all about?
Our bodies and our health.
Yes.
So something that I think is interesting is before God asks them, "Who told you you were naked?" they're hiding, and he finds them, and that he's like, "Where are you?" And Adam and Eve say, serpent told us that we were naked, and so we hid. And then he's like, "Who told you?" Or I guess he doesn't say the serpent told you you were naked. He says, "Who told you you were naked?"
Well, even before that, I mean, like they noticed they're naked for the first time. Like this nakedness is everywhere, right? They've been naked the whole time. Like we don't know if it's actually fully walking around, buck naked, but like, I mean, they were naked the whole time. Like, and now it's a problem. Now nakedness is a problem, right? It's the first thing that they notice. It's the first thing they tell God, right? And so I did a little research here because, I have to do something here. And I'll call out our Bama friends at the Bama podcast because they kind of gave me this information. But it's just interesting the words used if you look at the Hebrew words. Because remember, this is a storytelling culture that we come from, that the Hebrew people come from. This is how they passed things down. They didn't have Netflix. They had storytelling at the fire, right? And so the word naked in Hebrew is arom, like Arowm. Nakedness is Erom. So Erowm. Crafty, as in what the serpent was named, is Erum. Changing one letter, one sound. And it's just interesting that like if you're listening to that, you're gonna hear something different. You're gonna catch up on some similarities. Like you're gonna get hung up maybe on the whether nakedness and crafty, like they're closely tied to each other in this context. And so I just thought that was interesting. I thought, that just coming from this place of where we're starting, like, let's talk about naked, Rome.
Yeah. And like you said, Taylor, they were always like that. They were built like that. They were existing like that before they chose the tree. And to go against God's requests, suggestions, right? It was just, don't do this, the one thing. And so I think that's so interesting that all of a sudden then you're aware of it, and how much in our story with health or in relationships are we existing on a certain like plane, and doing things a certain way, and then we hear something from somebody else or whatever, we're scrolling or we read a book or a sermon hits us, and then there's like this understanding of, oh wait, I didn't see that about myself, or I did. And it, I don't want to maybe use the word trigger, but it shifts something in us, and then we have a response, and it's either to go toward in curiosity, but often with health I find that people recoil in fear or shame of like, oh no, am I been doing this wrong? Is this oh, and then we kind of just like fall into a pit, and how important community is at that point, to have people that you can go to and say, okay, this just came into my understanding or my awareness, and I need help. Or do you think I should shift this? What should I do?
Okay.
Okay.
So we had a little bit of a recording snafu there, and now Abby and Taylor are together in the same room, in the same picture. For those of people who are just listening and not watching this recording, they don't even know that we've all been in separate rooms, just having. They're
They're
missing out.
missing
They should
out.
hop onto YouTube and watch us one day.
Technology is a detriment here.
And the fact that we coordinated Christmas outfits this morning unintentionally. This is what happens when you're married for 20 years.
It was fitting. And you know what I just thought too? You guys could act out some portion of the nativity scene with the Star of David above your heads.
You know, when we had Amelia, when she was a baby, we were Mary and Joseph, and she was baby Jesus at a Lutheran church in Chesterfield.
She was also like 10 months old at that point.
She was so fat.
No, she's over a year at that point. Yeah, she was so fat.
She was the fattest baby Jesus ever. It was so great. Anyways, I think that it's very poignant that now we're in the same box, because I was just talking about how when we are listening to health information and we get triggered or something comes up that we realize we may need help doing something, do we hide, like in the garden with Adam and Eve, realizing that they're naked? Or do we go toward, which is what God was doing, meeting them where they were at and calling them out and saying, hey, who told you this? And so now we're together.
I don't even know what you guys were talking about after I left there. So
I don't know when you dropped out.
I don't either. So I was like, and I'm gone.
Well, we can rehash.
But I the one thing I want to say about what you just said was you skipped a part where Adam and Eve blamed somebody else for their problem.
Is that the feisty response when you get triggered and you don't want to?
Well, it's you don't want to own it. So you're like, well, you're causing me to have this, and you're the cause of all my issues. You're the cause of my emotional turmoil. I cancel you.
I totally do that sometimes.
You cancel me?
I don't cancel you, but there's spaces in my head when I'm going through my own.
In your head?
No. But it's easy when you're busy day to day trying to navigate all the stuff coming at you, where I have recognized that I will be like, well, if only he would do this, this, and this. If only my kid did this. If only my staff did this, until I have to slow down and realize, what can I control? What was that quote you talked about the other night, Kirsten?
Oh, yeah. Suzanne Stabile says, what is mine to hold, or what is mine to do?
Yes. And that space of what is mine to hold in the sense of dominion and stewardship. Like, what can I actually address right now that is reasonable and doable? You know, I think so often in my health journey, my thing, and Taylor can attest to this, is where I will say, I need to shift something. And then I take the most drastic step. I'm fasting for 30 days, or I'm never going to do this one thing again.
And Taylor, you need to do it with me to be a supportive husband.
And he's like, what?
And my favorite part about that often has happened historically, not so much recently, is then she'll just decide to stop, but not communicate that she stopped. And so I'm still struggling with this fasting for 30 days or whatever it is. And she's like, oh, I quit that like a week ago. Mother of God, what? Like, so, but we've grown. We communicate better now. Look at us. We're doing so much better.
And I have learned not to go all or nothing and declare these big 30-day fast, vegan, whatever thing that I'm going to say I'm going to do.
And I've decided to do things as opposed to just avoiding them altogether. So, hey, here we are.
And growth
All right. I want to take us back. In case people are just listening to this,
Thank
they didn't listen to episode 0 and they're jumping into episode 1.
Go
Go back
back
to
to
0.
zero.
But just a
You have to
little
go
quick
back to zero.
reminder, Taylor is a mental health counselor and Abby is a doctor of chiropractic care. So I'm curious, in like going back to the shame and the hiding where we're getting our information, how do you guys see in your work people absorbing messages that lead to shame rather than wisdom and discernment?
Well, I mean, let's take Thanksgiving just happened, right? And so the week after Thanksgiving, I do functional nutrition for the majority of my patient appointments. And I have said this multiple times. I feel like a priest in a confessional after these big holidays because people come and they are like, well, I have 3 pieces of pie. I'm like, okay, we don't have to like carry all that. Like, did you eat it in a closet by yourself or were you sitting with your grandma?
Did you eat it in the middle of the night when no one's watching?
Right. Like there's a space of eating in community and feasting and celebration is biblical. That is something that Jesus calls us to do often. Admitting sin, there are times when he's like, now feast, right? And so if you're doing these things that you feel like you shouldn't have done, but you did them in community and celebration and relationship, there's grace for that. And there's a whole lot of goodness in that. But if you're doing it because you're stressed and you're hiding from your kids in your closet and downing a chocolate bar, like, okay, I'm glad you brought that to the light. Where were you at when that happened emotionally? What were you thinking? And so that's one way that I see it.
Yeah,
Day
and
to day.
people just assume that we're because we have these degrees and these jobs that we're perfectly healthy in all these areas. And Abby never eats sugar, and I'm always completely vulnerable. And neither one of those is really true at all. Abby does, in fact, like Oreos, and I am often not vulnerable. So, well, I think most of the mental health world, when we have what we feel like are mental health struggles, whether it's anxiety or depressive tendencies or shame, loneliness, like isolation or disconnection or dysfunction in a relationship, like which is happening more and more because of all the virtual versions of relationships, there's just a space of like, what's wrong with me? So you already hear the tendency to kind of look inward or down, like I call it navel gazing. And I'm not sure that's my original idea, but like, you turn inward, you turn downward, you stop looking around and seeing that you're not the only one that's, struggling here in this space. And so, so a lot of it's like helping normalize for people that, that makes sense that you're struggling in that way. That thing happened and that's really hard. And, there's no expectation that you're going to be perfectly adept at dealing with this if you've never gone through it before. And there's also no expectation that just because you've gone through it once that you're going to be really good at going through it every single time. That's not how this works. We struggle, and each struggle, we are a different person when we encounter that struggle. We are a different person today than we were yesterday, last week, last year. And just because you've dealt with grief before doesn't mean that dealing with this grief is going to be the same as it was before. And so I think, this lie that we should be different than we are, or that we shouldn't struggle. We shouldn't have to deal with emotions, or my emotions are a burden. That's a lot for people. It's like, I'm a burden if I share. And I'm like, actually you become more of a burden when you don't. When you fall apart and people have to help put you back together, that's burdensome more than it is like sitting with you and going, yeah, that sucked. That's hard, so.
Yeah. Oh, that was a lot of goodness in there.
Well, thanks.
You're welcome. It made me think of like so many things. I'm trying to hone in on one.
Well, let me say this 1 second before I'm going to say it, because if I keep looking down at my notes and I'm going to forget it. So I'm just going to push it away. And this guy, Skip Moen, I heard him from the Bema podcast again. So if you guys want to go tell Bema that we're talking about him, they might come and talk to us at some point. He mentioned a different translation of how did you know that, who told you were naked? And it's, how were you made known of your vulnerability?
Yeah. Like, who told you were vulnerable?
Like, yeah. How did it become to your awareness? How did it kind of bubble up in your awareness of like, you are vulnerable. You're not safe. You're being seen in a way that feels too much, something like that. So,
well, and a part of what we have all talked about is a question that we ask people is, where are you getting all of your information from? Like, God is asking Adam and Eve, who told you this? And we hear people coming to us with information that they've gotten from family or friends or on the internet, and they are deciphering it on their own instead of in the context of community, or instead of going to a practitioner. And something we addressed in the beginning, the first episode, was we want you to be doing this with other people. When you're interpreting what somebody has written on Instagram about your health and you're trying to apply that on your own, you can get confused, and that's not engaging in your story with other people. That can, not that that information is always bad, but it's can lead to more hiding. And there's so much information out there that we can get overwhelmed with, and people are trying to weed through
Mm.
and don't know how to do that on their own.
Mhm. Yeah, I think a few of the things that I always think about, I mean, I even had this conversation last night with someone who was asking me about a recommendation that one of their practitioners had recommended to them, and as I was pondering this morning's podcast recording, I was like, man, does she
Mm,
trust her practitioner? Is there a reason why she's questioning what her practitioner says? And I think that's an interesting space that we are kind of in culturally, of just not trusting our medical practitioners in general right now.
Well, they've given us reason to.
Yeah, definitely. But then that puts everybody in this really weird space where we are looking somewhere else. And the most easy
mm,
access is our phones. And they're right in our hands. And we have so much access. And so the three things that I was kind of thinking about was whoever the source is, whether it's your family member, your best friend, your Instagram reel, your practitioner, is the stuff you're being told, is it educating you and equipping you to make decisions that you feel confident in, right? That you can say, like, I know enough about this concept that I can make this decision without constantly doubting if it's the right one. So that would be number one. Number two, is this information here to just mask my symptoms? Is it just kicking the can down the road so that I have to deal with it later? Is it just getting me out of an uncomfortable response, whether that be emotional or physical pain? And then is it growing my fear and anxiety? So, kind of the opposite of the first one. When I think of this information, does it make me more scared of, do I have cancer? Am I going to die? Is my kid so sick that whatever it might be? We all have those very fearful thoughts that come through physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally. So if I'm taking in information, because, I scroll too, if I'm taking in information from a doctor that I follow that's been my mentor and I'm listening, but it triggers fear and anxiety, it might be really quality information. But if I'm going to operate out of that, that's not going to benefit my health for a myriad of reasons. And I can link research if I'm not going to get into it today. But I think those are the three things that I cipher through in my head when I'm talking to clients.
I mean, just the space also of like we want a quick fix. Like we're just in a space of like, well, I have fatty liver, so can you just give me a drug that fixes that? I'm depressed, so give me a supplement or a pharmaceutical that's going to negate the symptoms. But
Mm.
we forget the symptoms that we have are our body's communications to us. And when we don't listen to our body, then there's going to be a cost. There's a consequence that comes out the other side of that. And so really we just don't want to take responsibility for the choices we've made. Like we just kind of go through and we're like, well, my parents, or well, you spouse, or you sibling, or you community, you've caused me to do this, instead of just like, hey, you're made in the image of God, and the image of God is at the very least strong, and there's faith, but there's also resilience, and we don't allow ourselves to actually encounter uncomfortableness to the place of where we become resilient. We just want to be on the other side.
yeah.
We were having this conversation the other night, and the next kind of question that comes out of that is like, okay, well, we are people of faith and we have all of this. What does it practically look like? Because we can sit here and talk all day long about don't be scared. Don't try to, white knuckle through this. And obviously that's not what Jesus calls us to do. And so, like, the practical aspect, and when you talk about resiliency, the first word that popped into my head was resurrection. Of like, that's really the power we have in Christ. To be resilient is to be resurrected, right? To go from our old creation to the new. And as much as I want to be the new creation 24/7 all the time, like we talked about in episode 0, the already not yet.
Your favorite.
Oh, my favorite. I have to remember that. And so when I come to a place, as I often do in my day-to-day life, where I want to grapple and take control versus stewardship and dominion, which I really think, although they sound the same, dominion sounds like control. I think in what the Lord has given us stewardship over is faith-filled control. Does that make any sense? Is that an oxymoron?
I don't know.
Like when I'm faced with that, I want to control this. I have to take a minute to take deep breaths and remember who's in control, right?
So why do we go to control when we encounter something hard?
Because
We're
we don't know how it's going
scared.
to end up.
We're
Because
terrified.
we're
We're terrified.
Thank you. Yeah. We are terrified of this going poorly. We are fearful of emotions. We're fearful of failing. We're fearful of being vulnerable and being rejected. We're fearful of walking into a space and being alone and not being known. Like, I grew up in Florida. I love the beach, and it's my favorite analogy for the emotional world of things. And because sitting on the beach, sand isn't necessarily the most comfortable thing. Like, it's not bad when you're sitting on it, but the moment you move, you're like, oh my gosh, it's everywhere. But if your emotions are the ocean and the waves of emotions that come, the call isn't to just run headlong into the ocean and sink to the bottom. It's like, can you just notice that there are waves, and there's a high tide that comes closer, and there's a low tide that's further out, and there's waves that are stormy and they're big waves, and there's waves that are calmer and they just kind of lap up to the shore, and they all come to a completion. We don't allow anything to come to a completion when we avoid it, when we abdicate responsibility, when we just try to cover it up, when we just pretend like it's not there. And so I'm not sure how I got on that little rant, but here I am.
Well, we were talking about control.
All right, thank you.
And if you're just controlling the situation by staying on the sand.
So I'm thinking about dominion being more, we talked about dominion and versus control, and control is more fear driven, and dominion is more of like a wise stewardship.
Absolutely.
But do we want it? Like, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, like, I feel like one of our main problems is that we don't want to acknowledge that that's a thing. We don't want to acknowledge that, like, we have dominion, because that means we actually have to do something and take a risk and go into the world and not be of it, but be in it, right? We have to go towards hard things as opposed to avoiding them. Like, we don't want to be responsible for something falling apart, but some things you can't learn if you don't fail. And so, like, do we really want dominion? Is like, maybe as I'm sitting here, the question that comes to me is like, do we pursue dominion in our worlds? Do we allow ourselves to be under the headship of God, establishing dominion in our world, our community, our purview, if you will?
Yeah, it's a mic drop.
I'm thinking about my example, my Pam spray.
Oh,
Love
bring it.
Yes.
Yeah. So
It's
just a practical example of how I have seen this in my own life. And I think this ties in with what we were mentioning about feeling the burden of information and what do you do with the information that you have, and grasping for control out of fear. I was telling Abby and Taylor that recently, that last Christmas, my dad made waffles. My dad makes waffles every Christmas morning for breakfast. And I care a lot about health and wellness, and I read labels and I pay attention to things, and therefore I avoid Pam spray. Even though, hey, I go to restaurants and they're probably using Pam at restaurants, and they're probably using canola oil, and I'm eating that. But I walked into the kitchen and saw that my dad had made all of these waffles, and it's the first thing that I say on Christmas morning is like, you're using Pam. Use this instead. I pulled out a different option, and I'm going to grasp for control. And in that, I missed the relationship of like the relational opportunities of just saying good morning, Merry Christmas, and was then later filled with so much shame. And so I'm thinking about even that as like in using the ocean waves example, Like I hit that moment of fear and I grasped and struggled and in the fear instead of like, oh, I'm afraid, I'm gonna ride this out.
Let me take a deep breath here and let the wave come down. Like, and how did your dad respond? Did he
He
throw a waffle
didn't.
at you?
He didn't. I
I
think he
mean,
felt bad,
um,
on some level.
so when we reach for control out of fear, and we go towards people with control out of fear, we cause them to
Yes.
pull away.
Yes, and I'm sure I look back at it, so I felt so much shame and, I don't even know that I was paying attention very much to my dad. I felt shame. I could probably read, like, his
Mm.
recoiling to some extent, and then I was reaching more for a relationship.
Yeah, but you told us the other night a different story,
Yeah.
like the follow-up. So what did you
So
do with all that
later,
shame that you felt?
I went for a walk and I was talking to a friend of mine on the phone and I told her the story. And I don't remember what she said, but I remember her compassion and empathy and just understanding of where I was, why I had said what I did, why I had flipped out about the Pam spray, and whatever the conversation was, whatever she did say helped me move out of that space of feeling shame and embarrassment about what I had said and how I
Mm,
reacted. And then I think I went back to my dad and
yeah,
apologized.
yeah. Yeah, you just answered my next question. I was like, did you
I
ever
did.
go back and tell your dad?
I did.
Because you could do it
Sorry, Dad.
publicly here for
You're listening, which you will.
uh, but I love the full circle of, that's not going to never happen again, right? Like you're probably going to have another moment where you do something as your dad ages. I know I do with my parents'
Yeah.
health and my own concerns, like, and like it's just what we do and with each other, and because we care, but because you love something, that brings fear with it naturally. The what ifs are going to be there. And so, again, as we know more and we learn more and we have more information, it can work against us because we let the what ifs take over. And so, again, it's coming back to, all right, I have dominion, but I'm also serving
Yeah.
the king of the universe. And so I have to trust his providence. And we can have these conversations about Pam, but maybe not the first thing Christmas morning, right? That's a different conversation for December 26th of like, so dad, Pam, let's talk about it. Like,
Or you could just take the Pam and just throw it away in a secret way.
Hi.
Like,
Hi, Pam.
the Pam disappeared, Dad. We have to use something different.
I feel like the counselor, and you shouldn't recommend
No,
that.
I'm just kidding. Like, I mean, it probably should come up directly, but I mean, it would be more of a funny experience of like, where's my Pam? You're like, I don't know. I haven't seen it,
It's
Dad.
gone.
I don't know.
And then he gives you a grocery list and says, hey, can you go to the store and get me some more
And then
Pam?
I
You're
have
like,
to deal
Get
with
the
the
olive
ethical
oil
and moral
version this time.
dilemma of
there you
like,
go.
what? I don't want to spend the money on that.
And now come back to dominion and control. Here
Yeah.
we go.
Yes. One of the verses that I go back to often in the space of those questions I was asking, is this equipping? Is this educating? Is this masking? Or is this causing fear? Is James 3:17. So I just thought I would read it today. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. That is a long
It's a
list,
lot of words.
but I don't hear anything
Mm,
about fear, anxiety, control,
Judgment.
judgment, right? And so, this space of as we are taking in all of this information about our bodies, whether it's spiritual on a Sunday morning listening to a sermon or your favorite health podcast or your doctor or your mom's concern for what you're doing with your day-to-day habits, like the first place to take it is to this verse and say, okay, is this pure? Because sometimes like you're with your dad, your information that you gave him came at him with fear. So, I would honestly tell him, like, yeah,
yeah.
I don't think you should switch Pam right now because he's not going to. My whole purpose in being a physician is to educate people on the whys. Because if you can understand the concept behind why you're changing your lifestyle, then it will change long term versus the fad diets, the things that we're doing that I fall into of 30 days of fasting or whatever it might be. If I understand the purpose in a calm and reasonable brain of mine, like choosing this actively and doing it with dominion versus a scramble of like, oh my goodness, there's a whole different way that we then live that out habitually so that it changes our health trajectory long term.
My mind is going in 3 different directions.
I'm about to say, there's so many
There are
questions
lots of
percolating. I can see
questions
them all.
percolating. This feels like an appropriate time for you to tell us about the J curve.
The J curve. This is not mine, so I'm not going to own it. I will give props to people from the Allender Center and all their people out there. But it's found in the Psalms mostly. If you read most of the Psalms outside of Psalm, I think 88, there is a, oh gosh, this is so hard. Everything's terrible. Everything's awful. Everything is falling apart. I'm so scared and I'm running away. And then there's a but God, or a even though, Lord, you are. And it's a remembrance, and it's a turning away from our fear and our worldliness and our trying to esteem and control. And it's turning back towards the author of our faith, the author of our life, the author of salvation, and just going to our knees and saying, but God, you are, and you always have been, and you always will be. And put those glasses on, if you will, instead of the fear and fretting and the rumination glasses that we kind of exist in, but like seeing the world through the lens of God's will for us and God's salvation for us and his mercy for us and his grace for us. And Jesus has walked in these same places with us, and he knows. That's why he condescended to come down and walk amongst us, so that he would understand in a way that we would relate to him, knowing that he relates to us.
Sounds like surrender.
Isn't it always?
And surrender is uncomfortable.
You mean you want me to go towards something I'm afraid of that I want to squeeze tightly, and you're asking me to loosen my grip and or let it go and put it down?
And keep walking toward the unknown. Whew,
Which would
sounds
be
like
really
a new
scary
episode.
if we had to do it alone. But we don't have to do it alone. We are promised through
That's right.
the death and resurrection of Jesus that he will always be with us by the power of his Holy Spirit, and that he's given us each other.
Yeah. The church, the
And
body.
if today's conversation inspired you, subscribe and leave a review. It helps others find us and find hope and empowerment through this podcast. We'll be back soon with more stories and insights.
See ya.
Bye.